Serenity and this is my channel, and today we're joined by Ginger and Nova. Welcome back to another Holiday Misconducts. Today we're going to be talking about Easter, which is actually pretty straightforward on what the holiday is, unlike St. Patrick's Day that we just covered. So let's get into it. Holiday Misconducts is a series on my channel where I talk about major holidays, their history, and how they became a holiday, and a few crimes that were committed on said holiday. So today we're talking about Easter Sunday, the history, and a few crimes that happened on the Christian holiday. Before we begin, I do want to give some trigger warnings for the following: murder, gun violence, child abuse, mental illness, family violence, and a massacre. We actually are only going to be focusing on one crime throughout this whole video because a lot of crime actually does not take place on Easter, which was actually kind of surprising to me. I don't know why, but it was. So yeah, before we go any further, I do want to make two quick announcements. One, yes, my hair is really short and it's really red. I don't want to talk about it. I don't know if I like it. We're just going to get used to it. And two, I am now monetized, so my language in these videos going forward is going to change a little. You're still going to get exactly what I'm saying. I'm just going to have to say it in a way that the algorithm does not demonetize me, because about 15 of my past videos, true crime videos, are limited monetization, limited ad visibility, and I would like to earn full ad visibility. So some of my language is going to change, but you're still going to get the gist of exactly what I'm trying to say. So buckle up for today's case, grab a blanket, a snack, a drink, and let's begin. Easter Sunday is the principal festival day of the Christian Church, which celebrates the resurrection of Jesus Christ on the third day after his crucifixion. The earliest recorded observance of an Easter celebration comes from the 2nd century, though the commemoration of Jesus' resurrection probably occurred earlier. Easter follows Lent, the period of 40 days, not counting Sundays, before Easter, which traditionally is observed by acts of penance and fasting. In Western churches, Easter falls on a Sunday between March 22nd and April 25th, depending on the date of the first full moon after the spring equinox. This time span was fixed after the Council of Nicaea, 325 CE, in the Eastern Orthodox calendar, which uses a different calculation. Easter often falls much later in the year. Easter is immediately preceded by Holy Week, which includes Maundy Thursday, the commemoration of Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples, Good Friday, the day of his crucifixion, and Holy Saturday, the transition between crucifixion and resurrection. Liturgically, Easter comes after the Great Vigil, which was originally observed sometime between sunset on Easter Saturday and sunrise on Easter Sunday, so throughout the night. Later, it would be celebrated in Western churches on Saturday evening, then on Saturday afternoon, and finally on Sunday morning. The provenance of baptism at Easter goes back to early Christianity, probably the 4th century, when baptism was administered only once a year on Easter. In the Roman Catholic service, the priest blesses the water to be used in the forthcoming year of baptisms, with the faithful taking some of that water with them to receive protection from evils. The Easter worship service is one of the high points of the Christian calendar, and since the late 2nd century, for many churches, Easter has also been a time for baptism. Easter, like Christmas, has accumulated a great number of traditions, some of which have little to do with the Christian celebration of the resurrection, but come from folk customs. The custom of the Easter lamb appropriates both the appellant used for Jesus in scripture, such as John 1:29, "Behold the Lamb of God which takes away the sins of the world," and the lamb's role as a sacrificial animal in ancient Israel. In antiquity, Christians placed lamb meat under the altar, had it blessed, and then ate it on Easter. Since the 12th century, the Lent fast has ended on Easter with meals including eggs, ham, cheese, bread, and sweets that have been blessed for the occasion. The use of painted and decorated eggs was first recorded in the 13th century. The church prohibited the eating of eggs during Holy Week, but chickens continued to lay the eggs during that week. And the notion of specifically identifying those as the Holy Week eggs brought about their decoration. So they would decorate them because they were the eggs that were produced during Holy Week to distinguish them from any other eggs. The eggs themselves became a symbol of the resurrection. Just as Jesus rose from the tomb, the egg symbolizes new life emerging from the eggshell, but then they would eat them. In the Orthodox tradition, eggs are painted red to symbolize the blood of Jesus, which shed on the cross. Easter egg hunts are popular among children in the United States. First Lady Lucy Haynes was the wife of President Rupert B. Haynes, is often accredited with sponsoring the first annual Easter egg roll, an event where children and their parents were invited to roll their eggs on the Monday following Easter on the White House lawn in 1878. The custom of associating a a rabbit or bunny with Easter arose in Protestant areas in Europe in the 17th century, but did not become common until the 19th century. The Easter rabbit is said to lay eggs as well as decorate and hide them. In the United States, the Easter rabbit also leaves children baskets with toys and candies on Easter morning. In a way, this was a manifestation of the Protestant rejection of Catholic Easter customs. In some European countries, however, other animals brought the Easter eggs. In Switzerland, it's the cockatoo, and in Westphalia, it is the fox. Easter Sunday actually is relatively a safe holiday, like I mentioned in the beginning. There has been no indication that crime rates actually go up on the holiday, but it doesn't mean crime doesn't happen. In Juarez, Mexico, the sister city to El Paso, Texas, crime rates actually usually drop during Holy Week, which is strange being as Juarez is one of the most dangerous cities in the world, but the city is also very Catholic. In fact, 85% is Catholic. In 2021, 3 gun-related shootings happened on Easter Sunday. Today, we are going to be focusing on one crime, and it's a pretty sad one. Like I said, crime doesn't usually happen on Easter Sunday, so there's very little crimes to talk about, and the ones that usually do are actually really sad, unlike the St. Patrick's Day ones I just covered. So that is all of the religious history with Easter Sunday. Now that that portion is out of the way, one horrific crime happened on Easter in 1975, and this is that story. There are actually 2 major massacres that occurred on Easter Sunday. One is called the Palm Sunday Massacre, and the other one, which I will be covering today, is called the Easter Sunday Massacre. The first one I mentioned I will actually be covering next year for this series, but let's get to this year's case. It was Sunday, March 30th, 1975 in Hamilton, Ohio, about 40 minutes northwest from big city Cincinnati, Ohio. An 8-year-old girl delivered an Easter basket to her elderly neighbor's house. When the child returned home, she told her father that their neighbor, 61-year-old Charity Rupert, was excited as her whole family was coming over to eat Easter dinner. Leonard Rupert Jr. was 43 years old, the eldest of Charity's 2 sons, married a woman named Alma, and had 8 children with her who ranged in the ages 4 to 17. They had a big family. That Sunday morning, Alma and Leonard piled all 8 of their kids into their black van and drove to his mother's house at 635 Minor Avenue in Hamilton, Ohio. His younger brother, 41-year-old James Rupert, lived with his mom, so the rest of the family was actually already there at Charity's house, herself and James. Leonard Jr. had no clue within a couple hours after a couple of fun Easter festivities, his 8 children, his wife, his mother, and himself would no longer be alive. To understand why this massacre happened, we have to jump back to Leonard and James's childhood. James Urban Rupert was born on March 29th, 1934. His early life was sad and abusive. His mother, Charity, often called him a mistake because she wanted a daughter instead of another son. His father, Leonard Sr., was a violent man with a quick temper and little time or affection for his 2 sons, James and Leonard Jr. Their father died in 1947 when James was only 12 years old and his brother, Leonard Jr., was only 14 years old. To the 2 boys, their father wasn't missed at all. Leonard Jr., at only 14 years, became the head of the family, the man of the house, if you will, and according to James, picked on his little brother incessantly for being a weakling. James did poorly in school, had very little friends, and was always smaller in size than his older brother. As an adult, James was only 5'6" tall and weighed about 135 pounds. By age 16, James was so unhappy at home, he attempted unaliving himself by hanging his body using a sheet. James failed and reassigned himself to an unremarkable life. As James grew older, his resentment for his brother grew. James flunked out of college after 2 years, while Leonard earned a degree in electrical engineering and excelled in sports. After flunking out of college, James trained as a draftsman, who's an engineering technician who makes detailed technical drawings or plans for machinery, buildings, and electronics, infrastructures, sections, and etc. You get the point. To make matters worse, Leonard married one of the few girlfriends that James had, Alma, with whom Leonard had 8 children with, his nieces and nephews. So resentment grew there. Leonard had a great job with General Electric, where James at 41 years old was unemployed and living with his mother still. On top of it all, James owed money to his brother and his mom, from who he had borrowed a large sums after losing what little he had in the stock market crash of 1973 to 1974, and spending too much of it on booze. Although by 1975, James was unemployed, was unmarried, and still living at home with his mother. His mother, Charity, was frustrated with his inability to keep a job and his constant day drinking, and she threatened to evict him from their home. It wasn't the first time this had happened. Charity believed if her son didn't drink every night, that he would have enough money to pay her rent, as he lived in her house, still at 41. In contrast, his older brother Leonard owned his own home in the city of Fairfield, Ohio, about 10 minutes away from Hamilton, Ohio. The threat seemed to have been what finally sent James over the edge, leading him to annihilate his whole family. James was described as modest, bookish, and helpful, of a man who was unremarkable and just quiet. In addition, he had no police record. About a month before Easter Sunday, James Rupert inquired about silencers for his weapons while purchasing ammunition. His behavior deteriorated, caused by a belief deep depression as he neared the breaking point. March 29th, 1975, a day before Easter, was James' 41st birthday. A witness later reported seeing him shooting at aluminum cans with a .357 Magnum handgun along the banks of the Great Miami River in Hamilton, Ohio, about 24 minutes away from his mom's house. He went out later that night for drinking at the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge like he did every night, where he talked with an employee named Wanda Bishop, who was 28 years old. She later recalled that James seemed deeply depressed and talked about his frustrations with his mother's demands on him and her threatening eviction, claiming that he needed to solve the problem. James left the bar at around 11 p.m. that night and later returned. When Wanda asked if he had solved his problem, he replied, "No, not yet." He then stayed at the bar until closing at 2:30 a.m. So back to Easter Sunday, March 30th, 1975, Leonard, Alma, and their 8 children arrived at his mother's house. James was still sleeping in his room, burning off his hangover. Downstairs, the children enjoyed an Easter egg hunt in the front yard of the house. Afterwards, they all came inside. While Charity, Alma, and Leonard finished dinner preparations, it's believed they were making Sloppy Joe's sandwiches. The children played in the living room, opening all their little treats. By all accounts, it was a joyous day. At around 4 p.m. or 6 p.m. in the afternoon, James Rupert woke up, immediately loaded his .357 Magnum, 2 .22 caliber handguns, and a rifle, then went downstairs. He entered the kitchen, where he shot and ended the lives of the 3 adults who were prepping supper together: Leonard, Alma, and Charity. His nephew, David, and his nieces, Teresa and Carol, were also in the kitchen, presumed to be watching as the food was being made. Their uncle shot them too, ending their lives. James then rushed into the living room, where the remaining 5 kids were playing. He shot his niece, Anne, and his 4 remaining nephews, Leonard III, Michael, Thomas, and John. He ended the lives of each of his victims by first taking a disabling shot and then finishing them off with a shot to the head. The only one who was not shot in the head, but instead was shot in the heart, was his mother, Charity. The massacre took less than 5 minutes. James then sat in the house for 3 hours before calling the police himself at around 7 or 9 p.m. He mumbled into the phone, and I quote, "There's been a shooting." When the authorities arrived, he was waiting for them just inside, next to the front door, where specks of blood were splattered onto his muted yellow shirt and plain slacks. He told cops when they walked up to him, and I quote, "My mother drove me crazy by always combing my hair, talked to me like I was a baby, and tried to make me into a homosexual." The authorities hadn't expected the massacre that awaited. The police described the scene as a slaughterhouse. There was so much blood splashed about that it was dripping through the floorboards into the basement. The crime scene showed no signs of a struggle. Everything was as neat as could be, except for a flipped over waste bin. To this day, stains can still be seen on the hardwood floors. The 11 victims range from ages 4 to 65. I'm gonna name all of them now because I believe the victims should be named and they should be remembered. So we're gonna do this from eldest to youngest. Mother Charity Rupert, 65 years old. Brother Leonard Rupert Jr., 42 years old. Sister-in-law Alma Rupert, 38 years old. Nephew Leonard Rupert III, 17 years old. Nephew Michael Rupert, 16 years old. Nephew Thomas Rupert, 15 years old. Niece Carol Rupert, 13 years old. Niece Anna Rupert, 12 years old. Nephew David Rupert, 11 years old. Niece Teresa Rupert, 9 years old. And nephew John Rupert, 4 years old. The murders shocked the small community of Hamilton, Ohio, and made headlines across the country. To this day, it is still the deadliest shooting to ever occur at a private home, which is pretty shocking because if you know anything about America, you know we have a gun violence problem. For those who knew James, they never believed that he was capable of such violence. To them, he was a quiet, unassuming man and the perfect neighbor. Detectives found 31 spent cartridges inside the death house, but neighbors said they didn't hear a peep from the 2-story home. It was a quiet residential street. James was arrested that night and charged with 11 counts of aggravated homicide. He refused to answer any questions and was very uncooperative with police. James made it clear that he planned to offer the insanity defense. Prosecutors believed that he planned to plead insanity and then after being cured would be released to inherit $300,000 of inheritance from his mother, which is about $1.5 million today. The prosecutors aimed for a felony conviction to ensure that James Rupert would not inherit $300,000 should he be found not guilty. According to county prosecutor John Holcomb, who viewed the crime scene, James had fired a total of 35 rounds, and all 4 of his weapons were recovered at the scene. All of his 11 victims were buried in Arlington Memorial Gardens in Cincinnati, Ohio. The original trial was held in Hamilton, Ohio. A 3-judge panel found James Rupert guilty of 11 counts of murder and sentenced him to life in prison. However, a mistrial was declared because the 3-judge panel did not know if the ruling had been unanimous or majority rule. And a second trial was held in Findlay, Ohio, about 125 miles north, since it was decided that James could not get a fair trial in his hometown. The second trial began in June of 1975, and prosecutors offered new evidence about James's target shooting and statements about solving his problem. The evidence: James Rupert was a man on the edge of financial precipice. He was about to lose his home, and Charity was demanding the substantial amount of money he owed her. An FBI expert testified at his murder trial. He said, and I quote, "Rupert was clearly a person who suffered from severe paranoia and operated under a well-developed delusional system." Agent Ted Grinspoon claimed he believed that the FBI was in contact with his mother and his brother to demonstrate that he was a homosexual. It was a minor slight by his brother that James Rupert believed was taunting him that triggered the explosion of violence. Apparently, when Leonard and his family arrived at the house, the commotion downstairs awoke the hungover James, where he then went downstairs to say hello. His brother Leonard greeted him with a frank "How's the Volkswagen?" James appeared to be put off by this comment and returned upstairs until he committed the massacre. James's general temperament had always been paranoid, believing that his mother and brother were conspiring against him with the FBI, even to the extent that Leonard Jr. had rigged his car, the Volkswagen, with some sort of trap, which all of that was not true. It was all made up. The coroner, Dr. Garrett Bone, testified at the trial saying, and I quote, "It's possible that some of them were shot once and then finally given the shot that killed them. It's unlikely that 11 people would have been shot and killed unless they were held in some way or were in a position where none of them could escape." In July, James received a new sentence of 11 consecutive life sentences in prison. James appealed his conviction and a new trial was granted in 1982. Defense attorney Hugh D. Holbrook, convinced his client was truly insane, personally funded the hiring of an expert psychiatrist from all over the country, multiple of them. On July 23rd, 1982, another 3-judge panel found James Rupert guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder for his mother and his brother. However, they found him not guilty of the other 9 counts by reason of insanity. James received 1 life sentence for each guilty count to be served consecutively. So he received 2 life sentences that would be served at the same time. He was not given the death penalty because between the years 1972 and 1976, the death penalty had been suspended in the United States as a result of the pending U.S. Supreme Court case decision of Furman versus Georgia. So James could not be sentenced to death for his crimes since they happened in 1975. Ohio does have the death penalty though. James Rupert was incarcerated at the Allen Oakwood Correctional Institution in Lima, Ohio, almost 2 hours north of Hamilton, Ohio. On July 30th, 1982, at the age of 48, James was incarcerated with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, ODRC, at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. James was granted his first parole board hearing in 1995 at age 61, but his release was denied. Another request was denied in 2005 at the age of 71, as was his last attempt at parole in April 2015 at the age of 91. In 2015, the Allen Oakwood Correctional Institution Parole Board released a statement stating, "The board has determined that the inmate is not suitable for release at this time. The inmate has not completed any programming recommended and does not appear to be willing to do so. The inmate's records notes negative institutional conduct. The inmate took lives of multiple victims. There have been strong community objections to his release. The release of this inmate would not be in the best interest for justice." James Rupert's Rupert's next parole consideration was set to occur in April of 2025 at age 91. However, on Saturday, June 4th, 2022, at 88 years old, James Rupert died from natural causes while he was incarcerated at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, a unit of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. A year after the massacre, the Minor Avenue house was opened to the public and all of its contents were auctioned off. It was then cleaned, recarpeted, and rented out to a family new to the area, whose members were unaware of the tragedies that had taken place there. The new family later left the house, claiming they were hearing voices and other unexplained noises. Other families continued to move in and out of the house over the years, but none stayed for long. They all quickly moved out. After leaving the house, these families claimed to hear voices and strange noises that they couldn't explain, lights turning off and on, doors slamming, and thundering footsteps that were often heard coming down the stairs. All of them reported sounds and voices that could not be explained. The house was abandoned for several years, but the last family that moved in reported nothing out of the ordinary. Whatever eerie haunting that may have plagued the previous tenants was over, possibly. Cinnamon Baker bought the 635 Minor Avenue house in 2008 at the age of 29 when her boyfriend's coworker asked about a man named James Rupert if she knew what had happened in the home. In the state of Ohio, neither a seller or the real estate agent is bound by Ohio law to offer any information upfront regarding these types of stigmas if a crime happened in the house. However, if asked directly by the buyer or the buyer's agent, the seller and or seller's agent is required to answer honestly and completely. Cinnamon Googled the name of the house she was about to close on, and she couldn't believe what she saw online. Photos of the home she was days away from buying, and the headline after headline about the Easter Sunday massacre. However, instead of running the other way, Cinnamon wanted another look. She said they had to fix something in the basement before we closed on the home, so we had to go back there anyways to check on it. So I said, let's go back and see how I feel, if I feel any different. Her next visit went well. There were no bullet holes or strange odors of the house. The home was like any home, but to her it just had a history. She was quoted saying, "This one just happened to have a history that everyone knew about." It wasn't until she signed the contract and moved in that Cinnamon Baker noticed the floorboards. Like I mentioned earlier, blood seeped into the floorboards, which it stained, and it's still there today. Cinnamon said, and I quote, "If I stop and think about it, sure, it's creepy and scary, but it doesn't make me feel any less safe here. It doesn't bother Cinnamon Baker that 6 people were killed, where her 2 kids now eat breakfast in the morning. She's not fazed that 5 children were shot to death, where she sits to watch television before bed each night. She's not even mad at her real estate agent for not telling her. She didn't ask." Cinnamon was actually not the first person to own the Minor Avenue house after Charity's death. In fact, someone had bought the house 19 years before her. A man named Dennis Snyder, who was 63 at the time of the sale, who sold it to Cinnamon. He also didn't mind that a whole family had died in that house, saying, and I quote, "It's just like driving down the street. Do you avoid an intersection because somebody got run over there? It's just a building that something happened in. To me, it doesn't matter. I don't believe in the occult and all that hogwash," end quote. Dennis Snyder calls ghost stories and hauntings silly. From the day he bought the home in 1989 to the day he left, he didn't experience flickering lights, cold spots, eerie sounds, or anything logic couldn't explain. Perhaps the echo of the shocking events of 1975, which seemed to leave an incredible mark on the house, had finally faded away. And perhaps after more than 40 years, the spirits of the Rupert family can finally rest in peace, especially now that James Rupert is gone. That is all the information I have on this case and on Easter. Let me know what you think of this horrible crime down below. It's just a shocking case, and it's really interesting to find out what has happened to the house since then. And let me know if your family has any Easter tradition. My family is not very religious anymore, so we usually just go out to eat, and we usually hard-boil eggs for all the dogs to enjoy. They get their own little like mini Easter egg hunt. Alright, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on all my socials. They're linked down below if you want to. The doggo picture of the day is this picture of Nova doing my laundry for me. Look, she's like, yes, me. Alright, love you, mean it, kisses. Don't do anything stupid, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye!